My name is Cregan Newhouse. I'm running for the office of governor of the state of Washington.
And what made you want to run for governor?
I knew I'd be in politics eventually. And it was last year. I'd been with the city of Seattle for about 10 years. And my goal at that point was probably to start looking for something in terms of maybe a state congressman or senator. When Jay Inslee decided to run for a third term, I wasn't too happy with that. I view myself as a little more progressive than Democrats. That's why I'm an independent. And it really surprised me that everybody else who had been positioning themselves to the run as a Democrat just kind of slipped back into the shadows. And I was a little disappointed with Democrats kind of allowing this thing to happen for a third term. I really don't believe in unlimited terms for a governor. The same reason that we have a constitutional amendment for the highest elected office in the land, the president can only run for 2 terms, should be applicable to our state government as well. Concentration of power is not a good thing, even if they represent what you consider your political party's ideals. Just too many bad things can happen. And so at that point, I started gathering all my notes together of what I key for the state budget and watching legislative affairs and developing files on the issues. And I knew I was going to run. So that was, it was probably fall last year when I knew it. I didn't even tell my wife until early this year, however. And I was getting everything together, and I let her know in about March, and that's kind of when the COVID crisis took out. So my plan to actually get out there and actively campaign was side-railed due to my job at the city of Seattle. I have to kind of participate and go into work on a daily basis to deal with to help with the COVID-19 crisis. But now I'm finally taking 2 weeks off vacation, so maybe I'll work a little bit more on my campaign.
And what kind of experience would you be bringing to this job?
Yeah, and that's one of the things as an unknown and an independent. I think people think, especially with 36 candidates this year, right, that there's so many fringe candidates out there is what they're thinking. It is a lot. And I've never have run for office before or navigated the campaigning system. It's hard to show people that I would be an excellent executive for the state of Washington without doing advertisements, which I refuse to do, paid advertising or accept any donations. So thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about my experience. I believe I'm probably one of the only, if only, candidates with high-level management experience in all 3 sectors. I managed a public TV and radio station for many years in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. It was my first managerial job outside of when I got out of college. So I've been in a studio like you, kind of setting up these things, both for radio and for television for many years. And on that level, for a nonprofit, I had to do everything from produce a weekly show for our city council and the mayor, where he'd come on and talk about fisheries issues, because Dutch Harbor is the largest fishing port in the nation. And I go to Juneau to talk to the state legislators and the governor, and I'd pitch to them the importance of funding for public broadcasting. I dealt with grants and fundraising, worked with the community, had a paid staff of 6, which is kind of small, but we had about 120 active volunteers, from DJs to coming on and doing TV shows. And that's kind of my initial management experience in my early 20s. I met my wife there, beautiful woman, and after we've been in Dutch Harbor for 6 or 7 years, we decided to come back to Washington and start a family. I was born and raised in Washington, eastern side of the state, on a farm, small hop farm in Sunnyside in Yakima Valley. And I graduated from Sunnyside High School, and then I went to USC Film School for 4 years. And that's what led me to be into public broadcasting. But when we came back to Seattle, I wanted to take the first management job I could. So now I'm in the private sector, and that was managing a kind of a amusement park. I think it's now called Bullwinkles. It's where they have a huge cafeteria, 200 video games, laser tag, and out back they have batting cages and bumper cars and so I did that for a couple of years, and then I was in the private sector managing businesses and even opening up my own business, a retail store. I manage a chain of retail stores from Olympia to Bellingham, 12 stores, and so now I have this extensive management experience in the private sector. And then for the last 11 years, I've been with the city of Seattle. So I've got management and I'm manager in the public sector. And the last several years, including rolling into the early this year, I was the acting manager. I was a consumer protection enforcement supervisor. And then last year and the beginning of this year, I was the acting manager for the consumer protection division for the city of Seattle. And so this is probably the most extensive experience you can get in terms of leading up for government. I've got 24 inspectors, and they will go out, and they're extremely skilled and certified to do everything from weights and measures. So if we've taken a lot of complaints, if a scale is not working, they can go double check it. We check all the scanning devices. So if something's not working at Trader Joe's, it's advertised for $2.99, but they're charging you $3.99. We can go kind of fix those for them. If you think that your gas pump's being skimmed, we can go out. We can take measurements of all that. Worked with almost every city agency, many state agencies, county agencies, often on a daily basis. Department of Licensing, Department of Revenue, weights and measures, again, obviously, because that's kind of ran by the state, but they don't have enough agents to handle the city of Seattle, so that's where we come in and take care of everything in the city of Seattle. I've led undercover operations that Highway Patrol has, State Patrol kind of observes on. I've been into hundreds of night license establishments and partnerships with liquor and cannabis agents, fire, and police at nighttime. And this is kind of a joint effort to make sure that everything's safe. There's no exits blocked. The noise levels are okay. We're certified to take measurements in somebody's home if there's a business that's keeping them up at night so they can't get a good night's sleep and go into work. It's just all encompassing. Almost any type of complaint you can think that has to do with the business goes through our office. And so that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And then in March, as a COVID crisis developed, they asked me to open up and run and manage the day-to-day operations for an emergency COVID-19 warehouse. And so for the last several months, I'm the first in to set off the alarm at 5 or 6 in the morning and the last to leave at night. And I've got a staff that, we've got 30,000 square feet of personal protective equipment. And we dole that out to everybody from the police, the fire departments, to the healthcare workers on the front line, social services that are going into nursing homes or senior centers, the homeless shelters, and it's just kind of been a complete shift. But they knew I'd do a good job with that, and they trusted me to do that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last several months. So the experience is there. It's all encompassing. I totally understand the state budget, the cabinet, how everything works, the legislative process. And thanks again for giving me the opportunity to kind of explain that.
Yeah, you said something very interesting at the very beginning, that you don't take any donations and you're not doing any ads.
Correct. So my ideal would be have somebody elected into a state office or a senator or a congressman who did not spend any money. I mean, talk about not being able to be manipulated by corporations. And even if you aren't, but you take money anyway, so you take millions of dollars, but I'm my own person. I won't take that call from that person who raised $1 million for me. Even if you are that perfect person, you're not going to have the trust from your constituency, because they're going to know, yeah, but you took $1 million from this oil company. And so, as a long shot as it is going to be, I've stayed committed to this, and I've refused to use connections. I've got, I've got people behind me. I don't want endorsements out there. I just want to put my message out there and see what will happen. And didn't have a lot of faith that this would go very far, but it's starting to roll a little bit. And the weird and funny thing is, on the Republican side of the ticket, you've got kind of 6 people out there that the paper is always referred to, because when a paper mentions a candidate, it's always like, we're mentioning these because they're raising the most funds. So right there, I'm going to probably be excluded from any conversation in most media. But the interesting this year is you take those 6 candidates, and the only poll we've had so far this year since we've all filed has split them between 1% and 8% each. And I'm like, my God, this would be a year for an independent to sneak in there past the primary. And if they could just get to above 10%. And imagine if our general election was between an incumbent running for a third term who calls himself a progressive, and he's got that reputation on the national stage because of his issues on climate change, which are great, even though he has been unable to enact meaningful climate legislation with a trifecta in the state. But imagine having a conversation on a debate stage between that person and someone who views themselves even more progressive. Our conversations now are not going to be, does climate change really exist? It's going to be, what's the most effective means of implementing legislation to deal and combat crisis. And I just think that would be a fun conversation to have on a debate stage. I don't think Inslee would be expecting that because he's looking at one of those 6 Republicans, which all bring sorts of baggage to the table, and regardless, he's just expecting to cruise easy victory against the Republicans. So no, I don't take funds. I never will, even if I'm elected. Even when I run for the second, it may be a lot more difficult. I've gone for the minimal reporting period, which is $5,000. I basically talked to my wife and said, "Hey, look, I won't have a happy hour for the next year if you can let me use $5,000 to kind of file and do the necessary stuff that I need to do to run for governor." And so that's kind of where we've been.
So one of the biggest issues right now in the state and probably the whole world is the COVID, the pandemic. How would you be handling it?
Absolutely. All right. So the governor is saying the right things, and he's doing the right things right now, and that's not going to be something that I would argue with him at. We have to be data-driven. I really appreciate the work that Weissman and Lofi bring to the table. They're experts in their field of epidemiology and contagious diseases, and we have to be data-driven. The mistakes that Inslee made were probably leading up to this, where we didn't have anything in our rainy day fund. And the reason that's important is because he keeps getting into a shouting match with Trump about help us out. We need testing kits. We need this. We need that. And when we didn't have any money in our contingency funds after 8-10 straight years of unbelievable economic growth, we handicapped ourselves from being able to handle the situation ourselves. And so at the very beginning, we should have been requiring businesses probably to wear masks, as divisive an issue that is. And they're never going to say, because that's what we're doing now, and they're never going to say, well, that we should have done that. But the reason that they didn't do that is because there was no PPE. And so I think they knew from the very beginning that they should have had personal protective equipment stocked and stockpiled and sent out to all the nursing homes and all the hospitals, and that never should have been an issue with our state. And we never should have depended on Trump or the federal government to keep asking for them to deliver when we know damn well that they probably were going to drag their heels like they did. So the COVID crisis, we're going to have to continue to be data-driven, going as is. We also need to bring and engage all stakeholders. So you take the eastern side of the state, and we're going to have 60-70% of the people there that believe that we should not have to wear a mask. And the problem isn't that they're selfish, that they want to kill people, and that's the rhetoric we're having, right? We need to bring them to the table and explain to them why we need to wear a mask. We need it's a yelling match is not going to solve anything. It's just got to, like, okay, well, what are your ideas? How do you and let them be involved. That might make them take a step back, and maybe they'll offer something and we can counter. I don't know, but you do have to bring all the stakeholders to the table, because it does no good to have these protests and counter protests just because people refuse to talk to one another. So continue to be data driven, but engage all stakeholders. And, the next time our economy starts building up, make damn sure that we put money away in our rainy day fund so that we can deal with the next emergency.
Another really big issue right now is the matter of police violence and racial justice. How do you as governor address this?
Yeah. This has got to be one of the most tough issues to talk about. And we all have our own personal stories of how we've come to understand how white privilege, if you're a white person in America, has assisted you, or at least not put any barriers in your way, which many of our other fellow Americans have. And too many people don't understand that, or haven't had that self-introspection, or haven't been lucky enough or blessed enough to have family or friends or coworkers who are Black or people of color. And we need to have that open and honest dialogue to try and convince people to go through that own internal process. Now, from the actual point of view of what are you going to do legislative-wise, saying defund the police has become kind of a battle cry for each side. And defund the police simply means use some money the right way. And we have to be able to do that. Now, coming from my background in consumer protection, where myself and 24 inspectors who work for me have special police commissions, I can tell you firsthand that there are many ways that we can assist the police department by absorbing some of the work that they've been doing that they don't need to, that they could now pay more attention to the pressing reasons that we have a police force. And so defunding the police can be done, and there's many good ways to do it. There's health professionals that could be handling these 911 calls, and it's it's one of those things that, again, we have to have an honest conversation with one another and start with the bottom line. What do we all want? We want the same thing. It's equality for all Americans, and then we talk about how do we get there. And we got to be courteous. And one thing that will not come from the executive office while I'm in office is divisive rhetoric. When one side talks about the other, if a Republican in leadership says all Democrats, they're traitors, and if a Democrat in leadership says, all Republicans are idiot racists, what you've done now is you're not speaking to the leadership of the other party. You're speaking to almost half the state's population, and it's just never going to get them on board. So I would never direct language towards an entire political party constituency. If I have a problem with what somebody's doing as a leader, either a senator or congressman, I would speak and address that person directly. I'm not going to. Nothing like that will come out of the executive office. So there's work that needs to be done. Our state patrol, as much as we respect law enforcement, and I certainly do, they've got not enough black officers, not enough black or women in leadership, and we need to address that. Same with most of our city departments statewide. It just needs to be, how do we recruit these people? How do we get them to stay? It can't be. I know people in law enforcement, and we have great conversations. And the ones that have gone through the academy the most recently are saying stuff like, our trainers are on board with de-escalation techniques and stepping in when your partner does something bad. But you're going to come across old school guys or old school police officers that are hard-headed, and they do exist, and they go too much in violence, and they are racist, and they've been told just wait because they're going to retire. And I'm not sure we need to just wait for those to retire. If we've identified those people, we have to address them, and they probably don't belong in the role on the street that they are. So a very tough question. There are ways to deal with it. We got to have an open, a respectful conversation with one another, and you certainly can defund police departments statewide by maneuvering by taking the budget and putting the resources where they belong, where there's not going to be a chance of escalation because a person who comes in to handle something that they're not trained for has a weapon on their hip. And
what would be some of your other priorities as governor?
There's one issue I'd like to bring up, and it's it seems kind of paltry in comparison to the huge economic and health and racial injustice issues that are occurring right now. But it was on my mind when I was first starting to run. And it's more of a story that's reflective of how hard it is, or how stupid it is to try and get things done in the legislative arena that shouldn't be that difficult. And that is fantasy football. So forgive me for going into this for just a little bit. But when I first moved to Dutch Harbor, Alaska, about 30 years ago, I got introduced to fantasy football, where you sit around with 11 friends and you have you draft players, you put $100 in the pot, and after 6 months you divide it between the top 3 teams. Well, it's illegal here in Washington State, and several years ago, somebody tried to bring up, well, let's make it legal because they consider it gambling. And my sister is a special agent in the state gambling commission, and so I cannot show her my trophies in fantasy football, as silly as it seems, because she takes her job seriously. And there's laws out there that exist that shouldn't, kind of like spitting on the sidewalk. But this is one that's not just a misdemeanor. The minute that you post your league online or you transfer your $50 to PayPal, it becomes a felony. And so you cannot have this league-wide players with your friends. And between Alaska and here in Seattle, my leagues have consisted of mayors and teachers and police officers and firemen and truck drivers and fishermen and biologists and scientists. And there's over 1 million people that play fantasy football here in Washington State, and they'd all be considered felons. And no, they've never been tried, but they have to kind of do this all in secret. And when a congresswoman tried to bring this up to legalize it, something called daily fantasy football, which is not fantasy football, jumped in with their lobbyists because they make billions of dollars by allowing people to go in on in one day and create their fantasy football team and lose or win $100 or $1,000 that day. So that technically could be gambling. And that's another issue, whether you should legalize it or not. It has nothing to do with league-wide fantasy football. So Rob McKenna, who used to be our attorney general, comes in to represent these guys, and he ties the legislation together. He goes, no, this is all fantasy football. Let's vote on it as one thing. And so it gets shot down in flames because people need more information about that daily fantasy football thing. This happened again and again for the last 4 years. We can't get that simple legislation through. I can't talk to my sister about winning my fantasy team. 1 million of us here in Washington State are felons because of being unable to pass a one-page piece of legislation in our state government. And as paltry, as small as fantasy football compares to the bigger issues in our state, it is reflective of how hard it is to get things done. And as governor, I would be like, stop right there. Let's, I would hold people accountable. I said, what are you doing? Why can't we just vote on this one issue? And so that's little things like that should not exist in state government.
So a lot of people are unhappy with our tax system in Washington State. Do you have any ideas about how to fix that?
Yeah, we consider ourselves progressive. We're the most regressive tax state in the nation. When the city and state taxes combine for 10.6% for retail taxes, the poorest in our communities have to work over 2 months to pay for their combined taxes for the year. The richest in our community have to work for about 8 days to pay for their taxes for the year. And the only way you're going to fix that is either by a wealth tax or a flat tax. A flat tax will probably never fly, so we got to concentrate on a wealth tax. And people say, well, that's unconstitutional. It's not. There was, a 1930 5-4 vote by the state Supreme Court that ruled that that it determined that the term income was personal property, so they called that unconstitutional. Well, income is not personal property, and so we need to push through that legislation and let it revisit the courts, which it should certainly hold up the mustard this time, especially when you compare it to how other states and even the federal government do not consider income personal property. So a progressive tax is constitutionally possible. We need to push it through and let it go through the court system. And I would like to do something like what Bill Gates Sr. Started in 2010, which is you start at about $400,000 income. I would say even a $300,000 income, a little, or of households of that much or higher. And then when you get to $1 million, a little more. And I was running the numbers the other day. And back then, I think the budget office said they would have raised about $2.3 billion. Now it's going to be closer because we've grown so much to a little over $4 billion. And there's that revenue now can be used, and it's got to be used to now offset what the poor in our communities pay for. And I think one of the best ways to do that is universal pre-K. That addresses so many other issues as well. And there's been studies that show that it's going to pay 7 or 8 times back whatever you put into it. And I'd love to see Washington State have a pre-kindergarten available for anybody who needs it, put on by the government with no charge. And it's going to save us money in the long run. It gives everybody equal footing. It even addresses race and social justice issues. And so yes, we need to get that wealth tax in. And now, of course, because of the economy, this is a hot topic, and everybody say, yeah, okay, we probably need to do something like this. And with Seattle passing their tax, so we need the progressive wealth tax in there. And I would certainly focus on encouraging our legislators to get that done.
Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
I do not. I greatly appreciate the time. I've been incredibly busy, so just to give you a little more about, I'm working full-time in the COVID warehouse. I'm still in the leadership with consumer protection, running this campaign for governor. I'm also going to school full-time with the University of Washington because even though I went to USC way back, I did not quite graduate. And so my kids, my oldest son graduated from UW, a degree in electrical engineering, and he said, Dad, you got to go back to school and get your degree. My youngest son, who's in the next room right now, he's doing a Boeing internship online. He just started with the University of Washington Aeronautics Division for engineering, and he says, Dad, you got to go online and finish your degree. So I've been taking one class per quarter for the last 3 years. I switched from screenwriting because I was in USC Film School, so they took about 100 of my credits, and I switched to social sciences. And the last thing I needed was an immersive ASL, American Sign Language course. And so 3 hours every day this summer, I'm also taking American Sign Language, at the conclusion of which I will have my degree in Bachelor of Integrated Social Sciences. So There's kind of, I'm certainly qualified for this. I'm just hoping that people can get the word out there. I've been talking to anybody who wants to give me a phone call or an email. Please engage with me. I hope I've made my case that I do understand how things work and that I really believe in doing what's necessary to move our state forward in a progressive manner. And
where should people go if they want to learn more about you and your campaign?
So my name is Cregan Newhouse. That's CreganNewhouse. And so my website is CreganNewhouse.com. You can also follow me at Cregan Newhouse on Twitter. I'm new to Twitter since June, but I've got about 500 followers now. I'd really hope to get more. So if we can have these discussions on how we're going to move forward, unify our state, and actually get things done, that'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason, and best of luck, and thank you for what you're doing.
You've been listening to Talk to Seattle, and I've been your host, Jason Rigdon. If you liked this episode, would you please share it on social media? Most podcast clients have a little share button. Click that and tell people why they should listen. If you want to support Talk to Seattle, would you please give the show a rating and review on iTunes? It really helps new people discover the show, and it makes me happy. Follow Talk to Seattle on Twitter at Talk to Seattle, and email any questions, comments, or suggestions to jasonrigdon@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.